Welcome to Reflector Reflections. My name is Annie. Join me as we travel around the world and learn from experienced and upcoming reflectors as they navigate and experience their human design. Today's beautiful conversation is on the topic of transits and navigating the timeframes of those transits. It's something that has been kind of in my orbit for a while because people ask a lot of questions on that. And so I wanted to sort of take us through this journey of what happens through the planetary transits. Now, if you've come from an astrological background, it can be quite challenging because the transits in astrology are when the signs change. And while that's an actual fact, or it is a thing, human design transit tracking is about the I Ching and the 64 hexagrams. So it's about tracking all through the gates, which go counterclockwise around the mandala. So today's episode, we're going to have a little bit of a chinwag about that and just go through some of the timelines of the planets and how they kind of like navigate through our chart throughout the year. I've found as a reflector, this is greatly beneficial to me because I can kind of relax. Tracking can be a full-time job, and especially if you're tracking the moon or the lunar cycles, because those gates change between 7 to 9 hours. So anyway, let's get into it. So I wanted to start this with a little bit of a kind of like backstory. So each year, the sun moves clockwise around the gates on the mandala, just like the sun moves through the astrological signs. So the sun in human design spends approximately 5 to 6 days in each gate. And within those 5 to 6 gates, the sun transits through each of the 6 lines. So as the sun and the planets move through a gate, it activates that energy of the gate. This means that the energy is released to flow to us, or to be, we have more access to it. The sun is considered the most dominant and important transit for us to be aware of. However, for us reflectors, it is stated that the moon has more importance. So hence why it's always track your lunar cycle. It's quite different. We are not the same. In my experience, in my personal experience to date, I have found that all of the planetary bodies that are moving around the mandala in their own timing, because they're all different, are really impactful to me. And I'm fairly certain they're impactful to you too. So for this video, I'd like to draw your attention to the timeframes of those and kind of spell it out in a really short and brief way. In human design, the timeframes for gate changes are a little different, as I was saying, than the overarching shifts of the planets in astrology. All the planetary bodies are moving around the mandala in their own timing. God love them. And together they form the transit, which exerts influence on us. When the sun or any other planetary body is in a particular gate, everyone on Earth is temporarily experiences that activation or that energy. It's like we are bathed in it. This is what is meant when you hear that a particular energy is transiting. So it might come in and go, oh, it's gate 45. We're experiencing gate 45. That's because the sun is currently in gate 45 and that energy is more available to us. It's also important to note which planet, so, we're not just talking about the sun, it could be the Earth, it could be the moon, is activating a gate, because that determines how that gate energy impacts us. For example, if the Earth is activating a gate, then that gate energy will be very grounding, right? And if Mercury is activating a gate, that energy will affect how we communicate. So how do they work? I'm thinking about this. How can I explain how transits work time and time again? And I want to kind of preface this with the transits do not change your chart. The energetic structure of your chart remains the same throughout your life. The transits affect us and kind of give us a flavor, like a sampling of that energy. A transit can even give us a temporary experience of having defined centers at either end of the transiting gate. What this means when people say that is you can kind of, you have a channel created, but it's not a real channel. It's just I'm just sampling this. That's why in the reflector space or in other spaces, it's just like, oh, well, I'm finding now that my spleen is activated. And it's like you're getting a little bit more of that sampling or experience. So your human design chart is a snapshot of the transits at the moment of your birth. Okay. It's shown in those black gate numbers. At approximately 3 months before your birth, shown as the red ones on the left side. As you understand your chart and the impacts of those gate energies of your life, you can start to begin to realize the potential impact that these transiting energies have every day in our lives. Nothing stays still, my friends. We are fluid, floaty, and transient. The planets themselves are always moving and always activating energies within us. So it's only natural that we too would be constantly moving and activating different energies. Anyway, the imprinting of the transits at our birth is honestly a very impactful moment on us and something that, hence why we're in human design, hence why we love this work. We can see it, we can feel it. We get to swim in a sea of transit energies from the moment we were born. Some good, some, yeah, anyway. So let's get into it. I really wanted to dive into these because when I was first learning about human design, I wanted to know, what did this mean? You know, I understood astrology, but I wasn't an astrologer. So I kind of came in the other way. Whereas if you're an astrologer, sometimes it's hard to get your head around this. So I'm hoping that this may make a little bit of sense for people. And I'm also going to provide like a little printout, so, you know, or a resource so that you can have a look at it. Now, I also want to preface this because I'm a line 5, that if I have something wrong here, please communicate with me and don't burn me at the stake. Again, I'm not an astrologer, but I'm hoping this will be a brief, short introduction to the timings. All right, let's get started with the sun. So the sun, as I was saying before, the sun transits the gates in human design every 5 to 6 days. So those gates are changing every 5 to 6 days as they go around the mandala counterclockwise. And if you have a screenshot of the mandala, you can see which gates are coming up. And each of those gates is assigned to a center. So if you have one of my printouts, you can see that I've color coded them, because for me, I needed color, like, and I wanted to work via the chakra system. So I've color coded them that way. But anyway, so in that 5 to 6 days, as the sun is transiting through a gate, it's also changing the lines. It's also changing the lines. And so even though the gate might fall into, for example, gate 45, it's going to stay in gate 45 for 5 to 6 days. And in that 5 to 6 days, it's going to tick, 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 tick through the 6 lines. And each line roughly will clock over every 22.5 to 23 hours, give or take. Right? So it just goes to show every day, even though we're cycling, say if you're in gate 45, every day it's going through a different line. And people will talk to you about that, or you might read that and go, oh, it's a line 5 day, or it's a line 3 day. That's what's meant by that as we tick around the mandala. Okay. The Earth is the direct opposite. So the Earth is transiting directly opposite the sun at the same time. So if you look on that mandala, you can see if it's in gate 52, it's going to gate 58. And it does the same thing. I have found, to be honest, just a segue here, I have found that there's sometimes which makes no sense, a 1 or 2 hour shift. But again, hey, it's celestial. Who knows? All right. The moon, our beautiful moon. As we know, its cycle is the 28 days, give or take, 0.5 of a day or whatever. However, it's really fast for us, reflectors, and it cycles through the gates every 8 to 9 hours. So in one day, we can have 2 to 3 shifts of the moon gates. And within that shift of the gate, we've also got the clock down of the 6 lines. So it's a very busy transit to track. And when you get into talking about tracking the transits, even just tracking the lunar cycle can be a full-time job. It's pretty like, oh, okay, we're moving here now, and at 1 a.m. Oh, I've got a gate change, but I'm asleep, so who cares? So things like that are just interesting to note of how busy this cosmic weather is. All right, next, have you noticed the way that the planets, again, I go off track, but it's important to note how the planets are listed for us is generally how fast and slow that they transit. So anyway, Mercury is up next, my friends, and it moves through the gates roughly. Again, this is a tricky one to say roughly here because we're getting into retrogrades, but it moves every, I want to say 3 to 3.5 days, just from all the tracking that I've done for the last couple of years. But yeah, 3 to 3.5 days. And again, in that 3 to 3.5 days, it's also going through the 6 lines. So you could, if you're into math, like I have done, you track the time it starts, the time it ends, and roughly each time it or you can just go to Jovian and just keep looking. But anyway, I like to do it myself. Again, retrogrades. When we're dealing with retrogrades, I'm not an astrologer, but things just change. And sometimes those days can really push out to a longer time, rarely a shorter time. It's generally a longer time. Okay. Who we got next? Venus. Oh, so Venus is a bit of a special case here too, because in the tracking that I've done, she's a little bit out of alignment with the Earth. Most of them are, like, it's not just this perfect circle. So her transiting period can be anywhere from 5 days to 11 plus days, just from what I've found. And it's like, okay. So again, we've got in that either 5-day cycle or 11-day cycle or 7-day cycle, our lines are going through. So, and the lines really do, they flavor, they have a lot of flavor behind what's happening, especially if that's one of, your gates. Okay. Mars, good old Mars. Mars. What can I say? Anyway, Mars moves through our gates every 10 to 11 days. Again, give or take, retrogrades. And so if you break that down, how long that cycle is going through the lines, we're probably looking at, 1.5 days. So, take it with a grain of salt. Moving a little bit out and now, and we're looking at Jupiter, and Jupiter moves through our gates every 23. Here we go. Here's a big gap. Some transits can be 23 days, some can be 54. I think that's one of the longest ones that I've encountered is a 54-day, and that was quite often just after a retrograde. So it's another odd cycle, but it's handy just to know, like roughly is, on a good time, it's 23, but in a retrograde, it can push right out to 54 days. So knowing where your line is in that can help you kind of like tick, 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 tick through. Saturn again is another slow one, and it changes gates again, long time frame from what I've looked here, from anywhere from 2 to 6 months. 2 to 6 months. That's a big gap, huh? But anyway, Saturn. Uranus or Uranus? It's really hard. I still want to say Uranus, but then you hear the kids in your class in school going Uranus. So everyone now calls it Uranus, and it's like, oh, okay, but it's still hard. Anyway, it changes gates roughly every 1 to 1.5 years. Again, retrogrades. So, again, an approximate, but yeah, Neptune Good old Neptune changes gates roughly every 2 years. But seems to be also a planet that changes gates each year. So even though it changes the main gate every 2 years, it goes into retrograde and then it flicks back. So it's one of those ones that I just kind of like don't overly worry about until I know that it's coming up in its actual change. And then I go, oh, okay, what's happening? Where's Neptune in my chart? What line do I have it in my chart? What flavor am I going to experience? What's going to be enhanced as we work through this energy, planetary energy? That's how I like to use them. And Pluto moves through our gates every 2 years, give or take. Again, it's a big one. So there you go. It's a little bit of hopefully jovial, light-hearted planet tracking in the good old human design. And another reason that I really wanted to talk into this a little bit more and write some notes on it is because I've been doing a few readings and coaching sessions with some people and and I had this experience as well, finding my birth time was a little bit not hit and miss because I'm adopted. So I had to ask my birth mother numerous times, when was I born? When was I born? And because there's a lot of trauma around my birth for her and me, she would kind of be quite handed about it and just be like, oh, well, it was here. It was this time. And for years, I think it's been, 10 years now, every now and then I'll just reach back out and say, are you sure? And when I got into the birth space many years ago, it was something that I would really note with the app on my phone, or make a really conscious, you know, really note it down when baby was born. And I found sometimes there was discrepancies between depending on who was in the room and who was kind of the main person, if it was in a hospital or a home birth, but who was recording that and how accurate it was. And also it was like, okay, so are we recording when the head is born, or is it the whole body is born, or when is it the cord is cut? At what time do we reference birth? And noting that, because in some of the coaching sessions that I've done, sometimes those minutes matter. And especially as we get into variables, it matters. And like myself, I'm in astrology, I'm on the cusp. So I've never really fully embraced a lot of the Leo because I'm right on the cusp between Cancer and Leo. And it's just like, oh, am I? And again, I'm kind of on the cusp between my 5-1 and 5-2. So I've really wondered and done a lot of muscle testing and pendulum and dowsing work. By the way, that's a really good way to ask yourself, because we know, I say this all the time, we know when we were born. We just got to tap into that memory of when we were born. Got to trust that intuition that we have. But something that Vanessa Henry speaks about in her courses, she does a brilliant work in variables, and she talks a lot about not being binary, as in not being yes and no, this is it, black and white. It's like there is a little bit of a spectrum here. And so I've been coaching and mentoring in this space of going, it's okay to, if you are on a cusp, to not be solidified in going, I am a 5, using me for example, I am a 5-1 and that's it. It's just like, I do identify with a lot of the second line. So, and I'm so close to that, well, not that close, 20 minutes, but still there's a part of me that kind of like feels that spectrum of the profile, and understanding that there's really no other gates that change, luckily, but sometimes within a couple of minutes, a moon gate can change in a person's chart. So being able to explore that and go, well, maybe you're having a little bit of flavor of this as well, because it's like when you put all your veggies on your plate, unless they get all mixed up, it's like you got a bit of sauce here and a bit of that there. You know what I mean? So I think for a lot of people, and it's called an experiment for that reason. It's, you have to kind of sit with this and go and feel into who you are and go, well, how does this feel? can I kind of be both? And if yes, then yes, and I did, like, just using my experience. I thought, well, if she got the time wrong, I'm pushing into a 6 line. Am I a 6 line? It was just, it really sat with that for a while to just go, what if? What if she got it all wrong because of her trauma and I'm a 6 too? But the more I sat with it, the more I laughed and went, there's no way. So again, it's just like, you better than anybody in the world, even if you feel that you don't. So, understanding this and looking at the planets in your chart and looking and reading those gates and those lines and feeling that energy really starts to sit. And that's another reason I love the gene keys so much, because it really does make it more personal. But anyway, that's really all I got to say today. I just think it's been nice to sit and have this chat. And again, a little bit crude. And I know the astrologers and you are going to come back at me, but and maybe that opens up the conversation. It's like, let's have a conversation next about the planets and how we can use those planets to really like highlight our gates, our line, and what's happening, because it's really useful information to have. And as I sort of say all the time, the more we can know about ourselves, the better we are, the more kind, compassionate, and understanding we are to others, because we're giving ourselves that kindness and compassion. So I'm wishing you a beautiful, magnificent day. All the best. Mwah.